I still remember the day my daughter looked me in the eye and said the words that cut deeper than any knife. "Dad, you're not invited to my wedding." My name is Richard. I turned 60 last winter, and I thought I had lived long enough to understand betrayal. I was wrong. For most of my life, I worked with my hands, building houses for other people, making sure their families had warmth and safety. Yet in my own home, I was slowly becoming invisible. My wife passed away 10 years ago. From then on, my daughter Emily became my world. I cooked for her, I saved for her college, and I stood by her through every heartbreak. When she got engaged, I thought it would be the happiest chapter of her life and mine. I pictured walking her down the aisle, giving her away with pride, and seeing my late wife's smile reflected in Emily's joy. But families don't always stay the way you imagine. Over the years, Emily started drifting away from me. She moved into her fiancé's circle, where money spoke louder than loyalty, and appearances mattered more than blood. Her future in-laws had wealth, businesses, and connections I could never compete with. I was just a retired builder with calloused hands and old shirts that smelled faintly of sawdust. Still, I believed I had a place in her wedding. I believed I had a place in her heart. Until one cold evening, she visited my small house. I had prepared her favorite beef stew, just like when she was a child. She didn't touch it. Instead, she cleared her throat and said it as if it were business. "Dad, you're not invited to the wedding." The silence after her words was heavy. The only sound was the old clock ticking on the wall, each second carving deeper into me. I asked why, my voice shaking. She avoided my eyes and mumbled something about the guest list, about how her fiancé's family wanted things elegant and private. But the truth slipped through when she said, "Dad, you just don't fit in." I sat there, staring at the stew I had made, realizing my daughter no longer saw me as family, but as an embarrassment. And in that moment, something inside me broke. But something else quietly began to rise. I didn't argue with her. I didn't beg. I simply nodded. But as she walked away from my house, I whispered to myself, "You may not want me there, Emily, but I'll be at that wedding. And when I arrive, you'll never forget it." I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, staring at the quiet street, trying to understand how my own daughter could erase me from the most important day of her life. Emily wasn't always like this. She used to laugh at my silly jokes, hug me for no reason, and tell me I was her hero. I kept hearing her little girl voice in my head. "Daddy, promise you'll always be there." And now, she was the one telling me I didn't belong. Her fiancé, Matthew, had money. His family owned a chain of hotels and drove cars I only saw in magazines. When I first met him, I shook his hand and felt the distance already. He spoke to me politely, but his eyes carried a shadow of superiority. To him, I was just the father from the other side of the tracks. And Emily, blinded by love or maybe by wealth, began echoing his world instead of mine. Her clothes changed, her words changed, even the way she looked at me changed. She once told me she wanted a small, cozy wedding with fairy lights and family around the table. Now it was all about marble halls, crystal chandeliers, and a guest list that had no room for me. A week after she dropped the news, I received an envelope in the mail. At first, I thought it might be an invitation. Maybe Emily had changed her mind. My hands trembled as I opened it. But inside was a polite note from Matthew's mother. "Richard, while we respect you as Emily's father, we believe it is in everyone's best interest that you do not attend the ceremony. We hope you understand." No signature, just cold ink on expensive paper. I sat there in my small kitchen, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of old wood, holding that letter as if it were a final verdict. They didn't just want me absent. They wanted me erased. For days, I walked the streets of my town like a ghost. People greeted me, but I barely heard them. Every corner, every bench reminded me of Emily growing up, riding her bike, running to me after school, crying into my chest when her first boyfriend broke her heart. How could she forget all that? How could she trade me for chandeliers and champagne? But beneath the sorrow, something darker grew. A quiet fire. They thought they had silenced me, that I would just accept the role of a forgotten father. But I had no intention of disappearing, because if they thought I didn't fit in, they hadn't seen the truth yet. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it into my coat pocket. "Fine," I whispered. "If they won't let me walk into that wedding as a father, I'll walk in as something they never expected." The letter burned in my pocket like a coal I couldn't shake off. I carried it with me everywhere, as if I needed the constant reminder of what my daughter and her new family thought of me. Unnecessary, embarrassing, disposable. I tried to talk myself out of it. Maybe it's better this way. Maybe Emily will be happier without me there. Maybe I should just let go. But every time I thought of my wife, her picture in the frame by the fireplace, her voice telling me years ago, "Promise me you'll always protect Emily," I felt that quiet fire flare hotter. Emily didn't just uninvite me. She betrayed the very foundation of what we once had. One evening, I passed by the church where the wedding was set to take place. It was a grand, Gothic-style building with high stone arches and stained glass windows. I stood across the street, watching the staff unload crates of flowers and silverware, preparing for the perfect event. My daughter's dream day, without her father. I imagined her walking down that aisle, Matthew's smug smile waiting at the altar, his wealthy parents nodding in approval while I sat at home, forgotten. The thought twisted inside me until I clenched my fists. That was the night I knew there was no turning back. The next morning, I shaved carefully, combed my graying hair, and looked into the cracked mirror in my bathroom. My face was weathered, lined with years of labor, but my eyes were clear. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I pulled out an old wooden chest from under my bed. Inside were keepsakes I hadn't touched in years. My wife's wedding ring, Emily's first drawing of me holding her hand, and a small velvet box I had been saving for her wedding day. Inside it was a delicate necklace that once belonged to her mother. I had kept it hidden, waiting for the moment I could place it around Emily's neck before she said her vows. Now, I wasn't sure if I should give it to her, or if it should remind her of what she had thrown away. Still, I placed the box in my pocket. That evening, I made my way to Matthew's family estate. They were hosting a pre-wedding gathering, a small dinner for close friends. I wasn't invited, of course, but I stood outside the tall iron gates, watching through the bars. Expensive cars lined the driveway, laughter spilled from the windows, and chandeliers glowed in every room. And there she was, my Emily, in a glittering dress, smiling beside Matthew as if she had always belonged in that world. She looked radiant and unreachable. Something inside me snapped then. Not anger, not envy, just a final acceptance. I no longer had a daughter in that house. Not the Emily I raised, not the Emily who once needed me. That girl was gone. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't gone. I would be at that wedding. Not as a forgotten father, not as their embarrassment, but as a storm they never saw coming. As I walked away from the glowing mansion, I whispered to the night air, "You wanted me out of your picture, Emily. Fine. But when I walk into that church, everyone will see me, and you'll never erase me again." The days before the wedding dragged on like heavy chains. Each morning, I woke with a restless energy I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't the man they thought they could discard. I was still Emily's father, and I would not let her erase me from her story. But how does a forgotten man step back into a world determined to lock him out? Quietly, patiently, like a shadow, I began to prepare. I polished my old black suit, the same one I had worn to her high school graduation and later to her mother's funeral. It was a little worn at the seams, but it carried memories that no expensive tuxedo could match. I ironed a white shirt until every crease was sharp. Then I placed her mother's necklace back into its velvet box and slipped it into my jacket pocket. I spent evenings walking by the church, memorizing the side entrances, the narrow alleyways, the places where guests would be dropped off. The workers were busy decorating, and I could almost smell the roses that would fill the hall. I knew I couldn't walk in through the front doors. They would stop me. But there are always doors that people forget. At night, I sat by the fireplace with a notebook. I wrote down every memory of Emily. The first time she called me Dad. The way she clung to my hand on her first day of school. The nights she fell asleep on my chest after hearing stories about her mother. I wasn't sure why I wrote them. Maybe to remind myself that I hadn't imagined our bond. That it was real once. That I hadn't failed entirely as a father. But the more I wrote, the more my hands trembled with anger. Because those memories were mine. Ours. And she had let someone else convince her they were worthless. 3 nights before the wedding, I dreamed of my wife. She stood at the edge of the old pier near our house, her hair blowing in the wind, her smile gentle as ever. She didn't speak, but I heard her voice in my chest. "Don't let them bury you, Richard. Don't let them bury me in her memory." I woke in a cold sweat, clutching the pillow as if it were her hand. And that was when I knew. This wasn't just about me being at the wedding. This was about protecting the last piece of my wife that still lived in Emily. I couldn't let them erase me, because if they erased me, they erased her mother too. The night before the ceremony, I stood outside the mansion again. Music played, laughter filled the air, and the family toasted to their perfect day. I saw Matthew raise a glass, his arm around Emily, his smirk just visible from where I stood in the shadows. They thought tomorrow would be their triumph. But tomorrow was mine. As I walked home under the dim streetlights, I pressed the velvet box in my pocket and whispered, "I'll see you tomorrow, Emily, whether you like it or not." The morning of the wedding arrived colder than I expected. A thin layer of frost clung to the grass outside my window, and the town carried that strange silence only winter mornings seem to hold. I dressed slowly, carefully. The black suit fit a little tighter around the shoulders, but it still carried the weight of memories. I buttoned the shirt, tied the old gray tie, and slipped the velvet box into my inner pocket. As I looked at myself in the cracked mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back. My hair had thinned, my face lined with years of labor and grief. Yet beneath those wrinkles, I saw something fierce, something unbroken. I left my house and walked toward the church. My footsteps echoed in the still morning, each one heavier than the last. By the time I reached the stone building, the street was alive with cars and well-dressed guests stepping out, their laughter spilling into the frosty air. Expensive perfumes and polished shoes filled the sidewalk. I stood across the street, hands deep in my coat pockets, watching them all go inside. Not one face turned toward me. Not one person noticed the father left in the cold. I moved along the side of the church, my eyes searching for the door I had memorized, the small entrance where the catering staff came and went. Two young men in uniforms carried trays inside, barely glancing at me. When the door swung shut, I slipped in behind them, keeping my head low. The hallway smelled of food and flowers. My heart pounded so loudly I feared someone would hear it. But no one paid attention. Workers rushed past with decorations, waiters balanced glasses, and the sound of a string quartet floated through the stone walls. I moved carefully, each step a battle between fear and determination. I reached a side corridor that opened into the main hall, and that was when I saw it. Rows upon rows of golden chairs, white roses climbing the altar, chandeliers dripping with crystal light. The church had been transformed into something out of a magazine. And there, at the far end, stood Emily. She wore a gown of ivory silk that shimmered like water under the light. Her hair was pinned up elegantly, a small veil resting above her brow. She looked like a vision, like her mother once did. My chest ached with pride and sorrow at the same time. Beside her was Matthew, tall and confident, his arm linked with his best man. His smile was wide, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of a man who believed he had already won. I stayed in the shadows, clutching the box in my pocket, my throat dry. For a moment, I almost convinced myself to turn back, to walk away before anyone saw me. Maybe this was enough, to catch one last glimpse of my daughter on her big day. But then I heard a voice. It was Matthew's mother, standing near the front pew, her words sharp but hushed. "Remember, no mistakes today. We don't need any surprises." The way she said surprises told me everything. She had planned to keep me out, to erase me completely. My fists clenched. No, I wasn't leaving. I stepped further into the corridor, the sound of my shoes against the stone floor just barely audible over the music. My heart hammered as the ceremony began. The priest raised his hands, the guests quieted, and Emily took her first steps down the aisle. And that was when a sudden gust from the open side door revealed me in the shadows. A woman gasped. Heads began to turn. The gasp rippled through the hall like a sudden crack of thunder. Heads swiveled, whispers rose, and in a matter of seconds, every pair of eyes found me standing in the shadows of the side aisle. I straightened my back, pulled my shoulders wide, and walked slowly forward, as though each step was a deliberate act of defiance. Emily froze mid-step. Her hands tightened around her bouquet, her eyes widening as if she had seen a ghost. For a heartbeat, she looked almost like the little girl who used to run into my arms after school, fearful, confused, searching for comfort. But then her expression hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. Matthew turned his head, his jaw tightening when he recognized me. His smile faltered, replaced with that same disdain I had seen so many times before. He whispered something to his best man, and I knew exactly what it was. Get him out. But before anyone could move, I spoke. My voice carried farther than I expected, clear and steady. I came here for one reason. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the small velvet box. Gasps filled the church. This belonged to your mother, Emily. I promised her I'd place it around your neck on your wedding day, and I intend to keep that promise. The hall fell into silence. Even the priest lowered his hands, caught between duty and the tension crackling in the air. Emily's eyes flickered. For a moment, I saw tears forming, her jaw trembling as she looked at the box in my hand. But Matthew stepped forward, his arm blocking her path, his voice cold. This isn't your place. You weren't invited. Leave before you embarrass her further. I felt dozens of stares piercing me, some pitying, some disgusted, others simply entertained by the unfolding scandal. The wealthy crowd loved drama, as long as it wasn't theirs. I locked eyes with Emily. You can throw me out after. You can hate me forever, but let me do this one thing. Not for me, for her mother. Her hand trembled on the bouquet. I thought she might step forward, that she might let me close the gap and honor her mother's memory. But then Matthew leaned close to her ear, whispering something I couldn't hear. She blinked hard, swallowed, and shook her head. No, Dad, she whispered, though her voice was loud enough for me to hear. You shouldn't be here. The words struck like ice. The box felt heavy in my palm, heavier than any tool I had ever lifted in my years of labor. Around me, the guests shifted, already expecting security to appear. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw Matthew's mother rise from her seat, her lips curling into a cruel smile. She motioned with her hand, and two men in suits began moving swiftly down the aisle toward me. I tightened my grip on the box, my mind racing. If this was how they wanted it, then this would no longer just be about a necklace. This would be about the truth they had tried so hard to bury. The two men in suits approached quickly, their polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. They weren't subtle about it. Their broad shoulders cut through the rows of seated guests like knives. I could hear the shifting murmurs growing louder, the tension tightening until the entire church seemed to hold its breath. Emily stood frozen, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Matthew's lips curled into a smile again, that smug, satisfied grin that told me he believed the problem was about to be dealt with. His mother sat back down, smoothing the folds of her expensive dress, as if she had orchestrated the entire scene. The first guard reached me and placed a firm hand on my shoulder. Sir, you need to leave. Now. I looked down at his hand, then back up into his eyes. My voice was steady, even calm. Do you know who I am? He hesitated, unsure how to answer. So I said it myself, loudly enough for every ear in the church to hear. I am her father, the man who raised her when her mother died, the man who worked double shifts to pay her tuition, the man who stayed awake on nights she cried herself to sleep. A ripple of silence cut through the crowd. I could see faces softening, some whispering with surprise. This wasn't the story they had been told. The second guard grabbed my arm harder, pulling me back. But I didn't fight him. I held my ground and raised the velvet box high, letting the light catch on its edges. And this, I said, is her mother's necklace. Emily, do you really want to begin your life today by pretending the woman who gave you life never existed? Emily's lips parted. Tears threatened to spill, though she shook her head quickly, as if to push them back. I could see the war behind her eyes, love for me, pressure from them, and shame in front of this crowd. Matthew stepped forward, his voice sharp. Enough. You're humiliating her. Take him out. The guards tried again, dragging me toward the side aisle. But I twisted free, not violently, just enough to plant my feet firmly on the marble. Humiliating her? I barked. No. What humiliates her is pretending her blood isn't standing right here. What humiliates her is marrying into a family that thinks money can replace love. Gasps rose again, louder this time. The crowd wasn't sure if they were watching a wedding or a trial. I saw Emily waver. She looked at me, then at Matthew, then at the necklace still trembling in my hand. For one fleeting moment, I thought she might walk to me, take it, and let the memory of her mother shine through. But Matthew's grip on her arm tightened. Choose, he whispered, though the microphone at the altar picked it up faintly enough for the hall to hear. Me or him. The silence that followed was crushing. Emily's shoulders shook, her bouquet nearly slipping from her hands. And then, she turned away from me. My chest hollowed out as the guards seized my arms again. The crowd began to buzz like a hive disturbed. I let them pull me toward the exit, my steps dragging, but my head held high. If this was how they wanted the day to unfold, then so be it. Because they hadn't silenced me. They had only given me more reason. The cold air outside the church hit me like a slap. The guards shoved me down the stone steps and let me go, as if tossing away something filthy. One of them muttered, "Don't come back," before turning on his heel. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind them, muffling the music and the murmurs within. I stood there in the silence, my breath clouding in the frosty morning air, my hands still trembling from the grip that had held me. In my pocket, the velvet box weighed heavier than stone. I pulled it out and stared at it. The necklace inside gleamed faintly when I opened it, catching the gray light of the sky. I thought of my wife, of her laughter, of the way she used to brush Emily's hair before bed. I had sworn to honor her memory, and now I had been cast out like a beggar. For a moment, I sank onto the steps, covering my face with my hands. The world blurred as tears forced their way out. I hadn't cried in years, not even when my wife passed. I thought I had been emptied of tears. But now they came freely, hot against my cold skin. People passed by on the street. Some stopped to stare, recognizing the man who had just been thrown out. A few shook their heads with pity. Others just kept walking, eager to return to their own lives. To them, I was just an old fool who didn't belong. But deep inside, something shifted. Pain hardened into resolve. Shame transformed into purpose. They thought they had silenced me, erased me, humiliated me. But they didn't understand. A man who has already lost everything has nothing left to fear. I stood, brushed the frost from my trousers, and slipped the necklace back into its box. Then I slid it into my jacket, close to my heart. If Emily wouldn't accept it now, then I would make sure she, and everyone in that church, would remember it later. I began to walk, my steps steady, my mind sharpening. I thought about the people inside, clinking glasses, whispering about the scandal they had just witnessed. I thought about Matthew's smug smile, his mother's cruel satisfaction, the way Emily had looked away when I needed her most. And I realized this wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about truth. About showing them that a father's love can't be erased, no matter how much money, influence, or shame is thrown against it. The streets seemed to blur as I moved, but my plan was beginning to take shape. I would not storm the church again with anger. No, my revenge would be quieter, colder. Something that would linger long after the flowers wilted and the champagne glasses were emptied. I reached my home and lit the old fireplace. The flames danced across the walls, casting shadows that seemed to nod in agreement with my thoughts. I laid out my notebook on the table, flipping to the pages where I had written down all the memories of Emily. And then, on a fresh page, I wrote one line across the top. "They will remember me." I underlined it twice. The fire crackled, the clock ticked, and outside, the night began to fall. In the distance, I could hear the faint echo of church bells. Tomorrow, the wedding would be finished, the guests would leave, and they would believe I was forgotten. But I would not disappear. I would rise again, on my own terms. The wedding bells faded into memory, but their echo still rang in my chest like a wound that refused to close. For days, the town buzzed with gossip about what had happened inside the church. Some pitied me, others mocked me, but everyone seemed to have an opinion. I walked the streets with my head high, though every word I overheard cut deeper than the last. "Did you hear? Her father showed up uninvited. They say he caused a scene." Well, what did they expect? He's just not their kind. Not their kind. The phrase repeated in my head, each time harder, sharper, as if love and blood could be measured in money. As if years of sacrifice meant nothing against crystal chandeliers and silver forks. On the third night after the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I lit the fire and opened my notebook again. This time, I didn't write about Emily's childhood. I wrote about Matthew, about his family, about the way they had twisted her against me. Every detail I had ever noticed, his arrogance, his cold stares, his mother's disdain, I wrote it all down. I realized something as the ink bled into the paper. These people built their lives on appearances. They thrived on reputation, on what others thought of them. They could erase me from their guest list, but they couldn't erase me from the truth. And truth, when spoken at the right time, is stronger than any chandelier or champagne toast. I began to gather pieces quietly. Old friends who worked in town told me about Matthew's father's business, about how not every deal was clean. A contractor mentioned they cut corners on safety regulations in their hotels. Another whispered about hush money paid to silence complaints. I listened, I noted, and I tucked each fact away like a tool into a box. But my revenge wasn't about destroying Matthew's family with scandals or lawsuits. That would be too easy and too loud. No, what I wanted was for Emily to see them as they truly were, to strip away the gold and glitter until all that was left was the rot beneath. Late one evening, I visited the old pier where my wife and I used to sit. The wind bit cold, but the waves whispered with the voice I remembered. I spoke into the night as if she stood beside me. I will not fail her again. I will make her see, even if it breaks me in the process. The moonlight shimmered on the water, and for the first time in days, I felt calm. My plan wasn't perfect yet, but the path was forming beneath my feet. I didn't need to rush. Revenge, I knew, was best served slowly, silently. I turned back toward town, the velvet box still resting in my pocket. Emily might have refused it at the altar, but one day she would wear that necklace, not as a bride, but as a daughter who finally remembered who she truly was. And when that day came, Matthew and his family would regret ever trying to erase me. Inside the church they had won. But outside, in the quiet world beyond chandeliers and fine wines, the game had only just begun. I waited. Patience had always been my strength. Years of building houses had taught me that no wall stood without a solid foundation, and revenge, real revenge, needed one too. It started with a conversation. I found Daniel, an old friend who worked as a handyman at one of Matthew's hotels. We met at a diner late in the evening, the kind of place where the lights buzz and the waitress knows your order before you sit down. "You sure you want to know this?" Daniel asked, sipping his coffee, eyes darting around nervously. "I need to," I said. My voice was calm, but inside, I felt the tension coiled tight. He sighed and leaned closer. "The whole chain's rotten. Corners cut everywhere. Fire exits blocked for aesthetic reasons. Cheap wiring hidden behind polished walls. Management tells us to shut up and keep working. Matthew's father signs the checks, but Matthew, he's the one pushing it. Wants to impress investors." I wrote everything down, carefully, word by word. Each note felt like a stone placed into the foundation of my plan. But I didn't stop there. I visited another old acquaintance, a woman named Carol who had once worked as a maid at one of their resorts. She told me stories of staff mistreated, salaries cut short, complaints buried under piles of contracts. "They wear their wealth like armor," she said bitterly. "But inside, it's hollow." Piece by piece, I collected the truth. Not rumors, not gossip, facts. And then, one evening, I sat at my kitchen table with all the papers spread before me. Notes, receipts, whispered testimonies. The firelight flickered across them, casting shadows like scars across the walls. I realized what I had built, not a weapon, but a mirror. A mirror I would hold up to Emily, forcing her to see what her new family really was. The challenge was how. A direct confrontation would only end with me thrown out again. But if I placed the truth where it couldn't be ignored, if I let the cracks show in the perfect mask they wore, then Emily would have no choice but to look. I decided to begin small. Quiet. A letter. I wrote it by hand. Every line steady, my handwriting clear despite the tremor in my fingers. I didn't sign it. Instead, I wrote, "From someone who loves you enough to tell the truth." Inside, I enclosed copies of the evidence, photos of unsafe construction, testimonies of workers, and a simple note. "This is the family you married into. They wanted to erase me. Now you know why. The question is, will you erase yourself too?" I sealed the envelope and slipped it into the postbox under the cover of night. The sound of it dropping into the metal box echoed like a gunshot in my chest. I walked home slowly, the winter wind biting my face, but my steps felt lighter. The first stone had been thrown into their glass palace. Now I just had to wait for the cracks to spread. Days passed with no word from Emily. Each morning, I woke to the sound of the old clock ticking in the kitchen, wondering if this would be the day she called. I tried to distract myself with small tasks, chopping wood, fixing the loose hinge on the back door, sweeping the porch, but my mind never strayed far from that envelope. Had she read it? Had she thrown it away without a glance? Or had Matthew intercepted it before her eyes could even touch the words? Then, on the fifth evening, my phone rang. The sound startled me. It had been silent for so long that I almost forgot what it felt like to hear it. When I saw her name glowing on the screen, my heart lurched painfully. I hesitated, then answered. Dad. Emily's voice was low, strained. We need to talk. There was a pause, filled only by the sound of her unsteady breathing. Then she whispered, Is it true? My grip tightened around the phone. What did you read? Everything, she said. Her voice cracked. The unsafe hotels, the workers, the complaints they paid to bury. I confronted Matthew. He said it was nothing, that all families protect their image. He told me not to worry. Another silence, heavier this time. But I can't stop worrying. I closed my eyes, a rush of both pain and relief flooding through me. She had read it. She hadn't thrown it away. My words had found her. Emily, I said softly, I never wanted to hurt you. But you needed to see. You needed to know the truth about the family you've tied yourself to. Her breath shuddered down the line. Matthew's angry. He said you're just trying to poison me against him. He told me if I listen to you, I'll ruin everything we're building together. And what exactly are you building? I asked. My voice was sharper than I intended. A life balanced on lies. A marriage standing on foundations that could collapse at any moment? She didn't answer. I could almost hear her tears. I don't want to lose you, Emily, I said more gently. But you have to decide which truth you'll live in. The one they've painted for you, or the one staring you in the face. Before she could respond, I heard Matthew's voice in the background, sharp and commanding. Who are you talking to? Hang up now. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my chest tight. But I knew what I had heard in her voice, doubt. Fear. Cracks beginning to spread. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the fire as it consumed another log. My plan had taken root. Now it was only a matter of time before the flames spread beyond control. And when they did, Matthew's empire of glass would shatter in front of everyone. The silence after that call was heavier than any winter night I had ever known. I tried to imagine Emily lying awake in that mansion, her thoughts racing, her heart torn between the truth she had read and the lies Matthew whispered in her ear. I knew her well enough to understand. Doubt once planted doesn't fade. It grows. 2 days later, I heard the first ripple. Daniel, my friend at the hotel, slipped me a folded newspaper over coffee. On the third page, buried beneath the headlines, was a small column about a fire inspection gone wrong at one of Matthew's properties. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to draw questions. They're scrambling, Daniel said with a grin. The inspectors are digging deeper now. Somebody must have tipped them off. I kept my expression steady, though inside I felt the spark catch flame. My letter had set more than Emily into motion. It had started to tug at the threads of Matthew's empire. That evening, as I walked home past the glowing windows of houses preparing for dinner, my phone buzzed again. A message this time. From Emily. Just 4 words. We need to meet. We arranged it quietly, in a cafe far from the polished streets she now called home. When she entered, her eyes darted nervously around the room, as though Matthew might appear at any moment. She wore a coat too fine for this place, her makeup carefully done, but the exhaustion etched in her face betrayed her. She sat across from me, her hands trembling around the coffee cup. Dad, she whispered, they're hiding things. More than I realized. I found documents in Matthew's study, contracts, payments. Some of them don't look legal. Her voice shook. I confronted him. He told me to forget about it, said it's just how business works. But when I pressed, he grabbed my wrist. Hard. She pulled back her sleeve, revealing a faint bruise. My blood ran hot, but I forced my voice to stay calm. Emily, listen to me. This isn't love. This isn't safety. This is control, and it will only get worse. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know what to do. If I leave him, his family will destroy me. If I stay, she trailed off, shaking her head. I'll destroy myself. I reached across the table and covered her trembling hands with mine. You're stronger than you think. And you're not alone. I won't let them break you, Emily. Not while I'm still breathing. For the first time in weeks, she met my gaze without flinching. And in her eyes, I saw something I thought I had lost forever, trust. But just as the moment settled between us, the cafe door opened. A gust of cold air swept in, and with it, 2 men in dark coats. Their eyes scanned the room until they landed on us. Emily stiffened, her knuckles white against her cup. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. They followed me. The two men in coats moved closer, their footsteps heavy against the cafe floor. Conversations around us faltered, cups clinked more quietly, and even the waitress froze with her tray midair. I felt Emily's hand tighten around mine, her pulse racing through her trembling fingers. "Stay calm," I murmured, though my own chest felt like a drum. We walk out together. The taller of the men stopped beside our table. His expression was blank, but his voice carried weight. "Mrs. Carter, your husband asked us to escort you home. He's worried." Emily flinched at the word husband. The wedding still clung to her like chains. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she whispered, but the defiance in her voice was fragile. I rose slowly, squaring my shoulders. "She's with me, and she's not a prisoner. You can tell Matthew if he wants to see her. He can come here himself." The man's jaw tightened. "Sir, don't make this difficult." I felt every eye in the cafe on us, strangers holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen. My fists itched, but I forced myself to keep steady. Violence would only give them the excuse they wanted. Instead, I leaned closer to Emily and whispered, "Do you trust me?" Her tearful eyes met mine, and after a pause, she nodded. I turned back to the men. "Then listen carefully. If you lay a hand on her again, I'll walk straight to the police. And when I do, I won't just talk about you dragging her from a cafe. I'll talk about those documents, those unsafe hotels, those payments buried under lies. And trust me, by the time I'm done, it won't just be Emily you'll have to silence. It'll be half this town." A tense silence followed. The shorter man shifted uncomfortably, clearly unnerved by my words. The taller one studied me, weighing his options. Finally, he muttered, "This isn't over," before motioning to his partner. Together, they turned and left, the door swinging shut behind them with a jingle of the bell. The room exhaled. Conversations resumed in nervous whispers, cups clattered again, but all I could hear was the pounding in my ears. Emily collapsed back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. "Dad, what have I done? What kind of life did I walk into?" I knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders firmly but gently. "One you can still walk out of. But you have to be brave. Braver than you've ever been." She lowered her hands, her eyes swollen with tears, but burning with something new. Not just fear. Resolve. "I can't go back there," she whispered. "Not tonight. Not ever." "Then you won't," I said. "You'll come with me. We'll figure it out together." For the first time since the wedding, she clung to me, not out of weakness, but as if she finally remembered who I truly was. Not an embarrassment, not a burden. Her father. As I led her out of the cafe into the cold night, I knew the line had been crossed. There was no turning back now. Matthew and his family would come harder, stronger, determined to keep their secrets buried. But they had underestimated me once. They would not do it again. And soon, the world would see them for what they truly were. Emily slept on my couch that night, curled beneath the same quilt her mother had sewn years ago. I sat in the armchair by the fire, keeping watch, listening to every creak of the house and every gust of wind rattling the window. My body was tired, but my mind stayed sharp. I knew Matthew would not let this go. At dawn, my fears proved true. A black car idled across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the pale light. Two men sat inside, not even bothering to hide their presence. They wanted me to know we were being watched. Emily stirred awake, her eyes swollen but clearer than I'd seen them in weeks. When she noticed the car, her face paled. "Dad, they're not going to stop." "No," I said, steadying my voice, "but neither will we." I poured her a cup of coffee and laid out the papers I had gathered, the testimonies, the notes, the photographs. "This is the truth, Emily. And truth is the one thing they can't bury forever. If we take this to the right people, their empire will crumble." She studied the evidence with trembling hands. "You've been planning this all along?" I nodded. "Since the day they locked me out of your wedding." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time she didn't look away. "I thought you came there to embarrass me, but you came to save me." Her words cracked something inside me, but I kept my composure. "It's not too late, Emily. We'll fight them together." Before she could respond, the phone rang. The old landline on the wall screeched, sharp and jarring. I answered cautiously. Matthew's voice oozed through the line, calm but venomous. "Return my wife, Richard, or I promise you." You'll regret the day you were born. She's not an object to return, I snapped. She's a person, and if you cared about her, you wouldn't have left bruises on her wrist. Silence followed, long enough to make my grip on the receiver tighten. Then he chuckled, a low, mocking sound. You think anyone will believe you? An old man with nothing? I have power, money, influence. You have what? A crumbling house and calloused hands? I glanced at Emily. She was listening, her fists clenched. I have the truth, I said firmly. And soon, everyone else will too. Matthew's tone darkened. Then you've declared war, old man. And wars have casualties. The line went dead. Emily looked at me, her face pale but determined. He won't stop until he breaks us. Then we make sure he breaks first, I said, sliding the evidence into a folder. But we have to be smart. This isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about survival. Outside, the black car's engine roared as if in answer, a predator waiting for its moment. I pulled the curtains shut and turned back to my daughter. They started this fight, I said quietly, but we're going to finish it. Morning bled into a restless day. Emily and I worked in silence, gathering every piece of evidence into a single folder. I photocopied receipts, testimonies, and reports, then tucked them neatly inside an envelope. The weight of it felt heavier than any brick I had carried in my years of labor. It wasn't just paper, it was justice, and it was survival. By noon, we walked together to the town's newspaper office. The editor, a gray-haired man named Harris whom I'd known for decades, raised his brows when he saw us. Richard, what brings you here? I set the envelope on his desk and pushed it forward. The truth, I said, and I need you to make sure everyone sees it. He leafed through the pages, his eyes narrowing with every turn. If this is real, and I believe it is, you're about to light a fire that won't stop burning. Then let it burn, I replied. 2 days later, the story broke. Front page. Bold letters. Hotel Empire built on lies. Inside were photographs of blocked fire exits, testimonies of abused workers, financial documents that tied every thread back to Matthew and his father. The town erupted. News trucks rolled in. Inspectors swarmed their properties. I sat on my porch with Emily beside me, listening to the world unravel for them. The black car no longer idled outside, its presence replaced by the flashing cameras of reporters hungry for answers. The final blow came when Matthew himself was arrested, his smug smile gone, replaced with the pale, broken look of a man stripped bare before the world. His mother tried to shield him, but the law doesn't bend forever. Emily clutched my hand as we watched the broadcast. Tears streaked her cheeks, but this time, they weren't from shame. Dad, I'm so sorry. Her voice cracked. I should have trusted you. I should have seen sooner. I squeezed her hand gently. You see now? That's enough. She reached into her bag and pulled out the velvet box. My breath caught when she opened it. The necklace glimmered softly, as though it had been waiting for this moment. Will you? She asked, her voice trembling. With careful fingers, I lifted the necklace and fastened it around her neck. For a moment, time blurred, and I saw her mother standing there instead, smiling with pride. Emily threw her arms around me, sobbing against my shoulder. Thank you, Dad, for not giving up on me, for not letting them erase us. I held her tightly, the fire in my chest finally easing. They thought they could take you away from me, I whispered, but they forgot one thing. Blood runs deeper than gold. As the sun set behind us, the air felt lighter, freer. The war was over. The lies had crumbled, and for the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because I had won, but because I had my daughter back.